Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Your Mouth Matters. I am Dr. Rebecca Taylor, your host. I am the owner of Green City Dental, a holistic biological dental office in Edmonds, Washington, and O2 Dontics, a practice focused on treating TMJ, sleep apnea and snoring, and functional orthodontics. So I'm really excited today because we have a very special guest on our show. We actually have two guests on our show today, but you guys know Lily. Lily Corley is here with us. She's our myofunctional therapist in the office who does Orally's treatment for us and myofunctional therapy and also craniosacral. Very lucky to have Lily. And we also have another guest who I'm really excited to talk to because I really don't know a lot about the topic that we're diving in today. So welcome, Sonia. Sonia Story is on with us.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Dr. Taylor, and thanks, Lily, for setting this up.
Thank you for being here. So Sonia's got a master's in movement science. She has been teaching neurodevelopmental movements to parents and professionals for about 10 years. Her website is moveplaythrive.com, and we'll talk more about what all of these things mean in our podcast. But she's treating a broad range of symptoms with kids and adults, ranging from ADHD, sensory processing disorders, dyslexia, autism, developmental coordination challenges, and sleep and emotional regulation. So this is going to be a really great podcast because I think that there are so many, especially kids that are facing so many of these different disorders. We're starting to see, or at least become aware of a lot more of them. So Sonia, I'm excited to kind of dive deeper into this and what you offer and what you can do.
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And I love to talk about this because it makes so much sense once we have an understanding of what it is that is going on. And even kids are relieved to know that some of the problems that they've had in functioning have a logical explanation and one that's sort of more mechanical. So they start to feel like, wow, I just thought maybe I was stupid or dumb or couldn't do things like other kids, but I'm not. I have something that I can do now, and I have tools now that I can use to function better. So both parents and kids and professionals love these tools because they see really good results. And basically what they are movements that are innate. So we do a combination of neurodevelopmental and integrative movements. And these movements are already wired into the human brain and the human body. And they come from the period of infancy. And at that point, during infancy is when they're supposed to be expressed. But oftentimes they're interrupted. And if they're interrupted in infancy, it will cause challenges later on. And so the good thing is that we can go back, whether we're 7 or 8 or 9 or 19 or 90, we can always go back and do these movements. The brain will still recognize them, and then the brain knows what to do with them. And basically what the brain does is it uses the movements to mature itself and the brain and the body and the sensory system. So that's a little bit of a background. There's all kinds of these movements and a lot of them are familiar. Like, when you take a newborn baby and you put a finger in their, and then they grasp it, that's a primitive reflex called a grasp reflex. And so that's a movement that is stimulated by a sensory input. And then you have the motor response of the baby grasping and holding tight. And so that one is very familiar. Other familiar ones are like sucking. Babies suck, and then later they grow out of that. And that's really important. Obviously, these movements are there for survival and protection, but they're also there to grow the brain, the body, and the sensory system. So that's a little bit of a background of what I do, what I teach. And it's phenomenal what happens to see the deep and lasting changes that can come when you do a regular movement program.
Yeah, it's awesome. I feel like, my daughter's 2, and, when she was a little baby, they're always checking all of those reflexes and everything. And it's interesting because you just don't think about how those reflexes and the way that we react and how that all kind of can affect you into your, and affect your total body health and affect you into your adult life even, right? And like you were saying before, like people are like, I just thought I was dumb, or I thought there was something wrong with me. And it's like, it seems so cool that you're able to do such a simple therapy with people, relatively simple, and get people just functioning better. I mean, that's also kind of the basis of like myofunctional therapy, right? With training the tongue to be up in the palate and get those muscles working. And it's just, it's unfortunate that I feel like we don't talk about this enough. It feels like there's such simple little things that we can do. And, they should be doing this stuff in the kindergartens and preschools and, the daycares and everything, because it's like, it's such a preventative thing, which is, to me, like, I'm very passionate about preventative medicine. So, so Sonia, can you tell us, like, this is very specific. And I know that you teach different professionals and you really have, created a name for yourself. Like, how did you get into this field? Can you tell us about your story?
Yeah, sure. So I read a book called Smart Moves: Why Learning is Not All in Your Head. And I started taking some of those movements and using them for myself and our two young daughters. And at the time, I was homeschooling our children, and I was also dealing with my own health challenges and my own kind of like, I would say I was kind of a scattered, anxious mom. and And I really wanted to be a better mom. And also, I just wanted things to be easier. Our first daughter tended to be hypersensitive. She had some trauma at birth. And our second daughter had more challenges. Like I had challenges when she was in the womb, and she ended up being hyperactive. So I had one hypersensitive, one hyperactive, and they were always just like exploding together because the two don't go together. And I was just trying to just have a harmonious family. And it was really hard, way harder than I thought it should be. And so I was definitely searching for answers. I tried to teach my children like nonviolent communication, which is a great set of tools. They still laugh and tease me about that. But like as soon as you're triggered, that goes out the window. And so we just were not functioning well. And I read that book. I started doing some of the things, and it really worked quickly. And I was just shocked. And so I had this desire to learn more. But at the time we were living in Hawaii, anyway, we moved to Washington State, and then I could get training. By that time, our youngest was 6. And I just got so much training. And one class led to another and another. I ended up like over a period of just maybe 2 or 3 years, I ended up taking like 50 courses in neurodevelopmental movement. I took so many courses, I got certified to teach it. And it was such a great time. And then I applied it all to myself and my children, and we saw phenomenal results. I myself recognized that I was able to lift myself out of kind of an underlying constant anxiety and overwhelm. And that was huge for me. That was so life-changing and such a gift. And then my children improved hugely. They both were advanced in academics, but they were really emotionally challenged in their sensory systems and in their sensory motor. The hypersensitive for one, hyperactive with another. And if they were in school, probably our youngest would have, the teachers would have said, she needs to be on ADHD medication. But they would have fallen through the cracks academically. So there's so many children like that. Maybe they struggle academically, but they're fine socially, or maybe they're fine with academics. But usually when these movements are lacking, and there's a really solid body of research that when these movements are lacking, it goes hand in hand. It's associated with many various dysfunctions, developmental language disorders, cognitive challenges, physical challenges, sensory challenges, emotional regulation challenges. So I don't know, when I got into it and I learned how life-changing it was, I just couldn't believe, like you said, that more people don't know about it. We don't talk about it as much. And I have a background, my initial education was in biology and psychology, and we didn't even talk about it in those classes. It was much later that I learned this. And it was very cursory in those classes. And it still is very cursory because I've looked at, current textbooks, and they address this subject of these neurodevelopmental movements, but not in depth and not in a way that gives you actual tools to turn it around and change it. So that's what's really exciting is we have tools and we know they work and we see phenomenal results. I've actually read over 1,800 case studies now from students of our courses. So I'm super excited about it. I love your idea of Dr. Taylor of, putting it into place in preschools and kindergartens. That if that was the standard, it would just be so fantastic.
Yeah.
So I share your dream on that.
I mean, just listening to you talk and having a 2-year-old, and I've got 2 stepkids as well that are 10 and 13, and just watching them grow up too, right? I met my youngest stepson when he was 4, and, he's got an ADHD diagnosis and hyperactive, right? And you're like, you go through as a parent, you're just like, oh my gosh, there's something not quite right here. This shouldn't be so hard. Like, why is it so hard? Like, your jacket is right there. Like, why aren't you seeing it? Like your shoes, and it's just, it does really affect your home life, and just the way that your family unit works. And when you were talking, I was just thinking about all the parents listening to you going, oh my gosh, I need my kid to do that, right? Because it's just like, I feel like there's just so many people that can relate, right? And so many of us we're busy and we're going around, and it's like when you have a child that's just not able to function in that way with you, it's very challenging. It's challenging for siblings, it's challenging for you, it's challenging for relationships, it's challenging for the teachers and the schools and all of that. So it seems so fundamental. And it's just like we see a lot of kids in our practice, and it's just so common, all of these things, all of these different symptoms, and the traditional medical route is just like, okay, well, let's get you on some medication, right? And there's just not a lot of talk about this. And even in the dental classes that I take, I take a wide variety of different classes. I've taken classes with, osteopaths and physical therapists and like chiropractors. And there's like mentions about primitive reflexes and reflex integration, but there's not really a lot of teaching you how to actually assess and then do. And so it's awesome that you've kind of gone down that rabbit hole. And I feel like we're always so affected by our own personal stories, right? It's really cool to like have that with your own kids take you down the hole, and you're like, I got to learn more. It just kind of reminds me of me and how I got here being a biological dentist,
Well, that's exciting, Dr. Taylor. And I really am excited about what you and Lily are doing and planning for your patients, because it is so important and it is part of holistic health and absolutely part of holistic health. And one of the reasons is because these early primitive reflexes, which are a part of the whole umbrella term of neurodevelopmental movements, there's all kinds of different categories of neurodevelopmental movements, but primitive reflexes are super important part of that whole group. And one of the reasons why they're so important, that kind of dovetails into what you're doing, is first of all, and I think every parent can understand this, but if you have certain reflexes that are not integrated, in other words, they didn't get their full expression in infancy, they were hindered in some way.
Can you give us an example?
Okay.
Give us an example. Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, there's like when a lot of parents recognize when they have a very newborn baby, the baby startles and does a little like flinging out of the arms. And there's that startling kind of jerky movement with the arms. Well, that is a survival response. And it's really important for that to be there expressing in infancy. It It alerts the caregiver that there might be a problem. Often the baby cries when they startle. It's just a part of nervous system development. But what it actually is physiologically is it's a fight or flight response. And of course, it's important to have that response, and it's important to practice it for the nervous system and the body because we need that. We need to have that. But at about 2 months of age, probably 4 months at the latest, that response should diminish. That response of that startle and that jerky flinging out of the arms and then coming back in and clinging, it helps the baby understand, if everything goes well in development, it helps the baby understand that they're safe. It helps them process sensory input because that's how it's stimulated. That response is stimulated by sensory input. It could be a loud noise, a fast visual stimulus, or a bright light. It could be a vestibular change, meaning like the head moves or the body moves. It could cause that. But all those different sensory channels could switch on that response. And again, that's really good in infancy. We need that. But if it stays, if it doesn't do its full job and if it doesn't get to full maturity, it's a problem. And the reason is full maturity is when that goes dormant. And so that leaves your nervous system in a fight or flight state. It leaves it in kind of an immature, raw, vulnerable state. And that hugely affects your sensory system because when you have kids, and so many kids have this, especially with ADHD, and this is established in research also, there's a connection between this exact primitive reflex and ADHD and other challenges, especially emotional and sensory challenges. But when you have that in your system, it leaves you feeling vulnerable, irritable, like you have constant fight or flight. It's this same thing as constant fight or flight. And so I was starting to make the connection to that and the sensory system. So when you're in fight or flight, you have adrenaline and cortisol, and those things make you more sensitive and that's a good thing when you're in an emergency. You want to be more sensitive, like, where's the threat coming from? Your eyes get big, your heart goes faster, all that stuff. Where's the threat coming from? And then so that's good in an emergency, but it's not good as your baseline because those neurotransmitters, the adrenaline, cortisol, they make you more sensitive. And so over time, you start to develop more and more and more sensory issues. And there's really not a way that I know of there may be like auditory processing things that can help, but the real remedy for that is to do the movements that allow your nervous system to mature and turn that response off on the brain turns it off itself. The brain goes, oh, I got this now. I can settle down and function from a completely different, calmer, more steady way of functioning. And that's actually what happened to me, only I was in my 40s when I started. That's how I got rid of my anxiety. And it was so life-changing. And I just needed to complete the maturity of my nervous system. And that's the thing, like a lot of parents and educators and a lot of every one of us, we don't know that there are these simple tools that can help. Mm-hmm. But I'm super excited also about connecting this to your work with myofunctional therapy. And it was so interesting as I started teaching because I'd have OTs coming to me saying, wow, this is the best thing we've ever found for sensory issues. And PTs would come and say, wow, this is the best thing I've found to help kids with their coordination, core muscle strength. And then SLPs would be like, I can't believe the changes in the speech. It's so much clearer and better and more. And then I had myofunctional therapists going, wow, this is really important to do. And I was like, myofunctional therapy, what is that? So anyway, the crossover between all these different areas, because when I started, I figured I'd be teaching parents and educators. But it's just been so lovely for me to interact with all these different therapists and specialists who find these tools exceptionally helpful.
Yeah.
Also, they're great for pain relief also.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it just slides in very nicely with so many different, fields. I wanted to ask you, because I'm always like very obsessed with finding root cause. Like, I always believe that there's like a reason why. So why would a reflex stick around? Like, why would that reflex in a baby not fully get integrated? Or, you said you'd like after, 4 months max, that startle reflex should be not happening anymore. And like, it's important for the nervous system and the development for them to experience that. It kind of helps. Like when you were talking, I was like, oh, it's kind of like we're plugging in all the plugs to the wall, right? Like it's like we're making all those connections. And then all the connections should be in, right? And then it's like, okay, we're good now, right? But those babies that are still stuck with those reflexes, why does that happen, do you think?
Yeah, so one of my mentors was Dr. Blomberg, and he was a psychiatrist. And he felt that one of the reasons that the reflexes weren't integrated was exposure to electromagnetic frequencies. He felt that that was an important piece of the problem, but really anything that can interfere with our movement in infancy, a natural birth process, because these movements start in the womb and they are an important part of the birthing process, and they're an important part of all the development that happens in that first year of life and some beyond. But like you cannot develop properly without these movements. It just will not happen. And so they're not sort of like these optional little exercise program, these are the movements we're designed with to be able to grow and function. And so there are so many things that affect the health of children and the natural womb life and birthing process. And so anything that disrupts that or gets in the way. So to give you more specifics, like medications, possibly with heavy metals or toxins, any kind of disrupted birth.
You're talking about like moms when they're pregnant taking medications or during the birthing process, like an epidural potentially.
Or the baby having medications. So there could also be any kind of trauma, illness, or injury during the womb life, the birth, or early infancy is, super. And C-section would be a trauma. That's not a natural birth. Poor nutrition, exposure to toxins. The other thing that we do culturally is we don't put our babies on their bellies enough. Babies are in containers. There's a real big controversy about whether they actually should be sleeping on their backs or not, because put a baby on their belly, they're going to sleep better for one, but they're going to get so much more input in prone. And they move when they sleep.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're probably not a fan of swaddling.
So here's the thing on swaddling. And I've asked so many OTs about their opinions on this. And kind of the consensus is do not swaddle past 2 months of age. If you think about it, swaddling actually prevents the moro from expressing. You want these movements to express in infancy. That's when they're supposed to express. But actually prone sleeping would stop that too. But it's a tricky thing. But yeah, swaddling can be a problem.
Yeah. I think I did swaddle my daughter, but it just kind of felt after about a month or so, it kind of just felt wrong. I don't know. I just kind of naturally kind of got her out of the swaddle. But, they just, and they do it so tight, like when I was in the hospital, they just swaddled her and it was just like so tight. And you're like, man.
Yeah. I think you're fine in the first month, but it is challenging, all the things we do in our culture that disrupt the health of children. There's just too many things, the screens, the electronic screens, and the crazy stuff
The
going
food
on.
that's not really food.
The food that's not food. Yeah. The plastics,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
think anything that disrupts your health could possibly disrupt
So
these movements.
basically, I feel like it's impossible to get away from all of the things, right? I mean, you just kind of have to do your best, but you'll be driven mad if you get too crazy about it, right? You'll live in a box. And I think, you know, I believe that we have to also enjoy our life and not be too worried about stuff, right? That we don't have much control over.
Yes.
But
Hmm.
yeah, that's really very, very interesting. So basically, it just sounds like just our current lifestyle is what's causing these reflexes not to fully integrate. And I mean, you were saying even natural birth. I mean, there's people that talk about how the birth canal has become more calcified and it's not as elastic as it was, and so even a natural birth is going to be more traumatic potentially on a baby, right?
Wow. Interesting.
So yeah, I feel like we're just kind of yeah. When you start to zoom out and look at all these things, you're like, man, we're totally screwed here. So
Yeah, yeah, the pesticides, the herbicides, we need a big turnaround. And I think we're moving toward that. That's the exciting thing.
yeah.
I think we are moving toward that. And we have people like you, Dr. Taylor, who are like getting the word out and really focusing on root causes. And I love that. And thank you.
You're welcome. It's just such a rabbit hole. You know, you go down one and then you're like, oh, it's deeper than I thought it was. And you just keep chasing, you know, it's pretty crazy. So so like, I'm just thinking about all the parents listening to this with like their baby. So how early would you recommend treating? And what are the early signs? I mean, we take our babies to the pediatricians and even the naturopaths and they check these reflexes and you know, at least with my daughter, they just didn't seem to be that worried about it. They didn't never talk to me about reflex integration, how like any movements that I could be doing preventatively or anything like that. So like when would you suggest parents like bring their babies in? Or are there certain exercises or movements that you would do just right off the bat, you know, if you had a newborn baby that you would start to do with them?
Yeah. So with a newborn, obviously the most important thing is to get the nursing going, getting the latch on, getting good help with a lactation consultant and just getting that going because the nursing itself is so important. So that would be number one. And that is actually a rhythmic movement,
Mm-hmm.
which rhythmic movements are a whole other category of neurodevelopmental movements that are really important. They're super soothing. They develop the brain and nervous system and the body, and they also help to integrate the primitive reflexes that we've been talking about. But, you know, it's such an interesting question because actually, if parents are in tune with sort of their instincts, they're naturally doing what is good for the baby, like rocking them rhythmically, bouncing them up and down rhythmically, soothing them with rhythmic movement, having them be, you know, belly to belly, skin to skin on the parent's body and moving around with your baby is all really good. That would be the start of it. But really you can start early. You know, actually, when you can start in the womb, we did this with a pregnant woman. She had to be on bed rest for different medical things. And that's hard because the baby doesn't get as much stimulation if the mom's not moving. So it affects the baby's development.
Hmm.
So we had her take her belly and just do this sort of side to side rhythmic movement while she was laying there. And so that kind of stimulation is really good. So you can start wherever you are. I mean, I started when I was 43, but
Mm-hmm.
wherever you are, start it from day one. You know, there isn't a time that's not good to do it.
Mm-hmm. And then and I'm imagining, I mean, is the treatment the same if you're a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old versus if you're a 44-year-old? I mean, are they the same movements or does it change based on what your age is?
Yeah, well, the patterns of the movements are the same. And a lot of the movements, especially the rhythmic movements, can be done by at any age. I mean, obviously, with a very early newborn baby, you know, there's going to be some modifications, but they're natural movements. They're they're innate within us. So they're not harmful at all. You don't have to worry about that. But the older you get, the more your body compensates if you have not had these in infancy. Because, and this is kind of how it relates to myofunctional therapy in one aspect, is because if you do not have these movements completed, then your brain is left in an immature state, particularly your brainstem. Well, one of the things the brainstem does is it modulates muscle tone. So if if the primitive reflexes aren't integrated, it leaves you with muscles that are weak because they're not neurologically getting what they need. So then what happens when a muscle's weak and you need to use it, it tenses up. So the older you are, if these are still in your system, the more you have possibly, just like long-standing muscle tension. And so let me just connect the dots here. So if you have that long-standing muscle connection, you're going to need more. We have more sort of targeted things that you can do to kind of release that and the reflex pattern at the same time. But then to go back and connect the dots with myofunctional therapy, if you're in that place where your brainstem's not mature and you don't have proper muscle tone, that's going to affect the tongue muscle, the mouth muscles, the facial oral muscles. And there are facial oral primitive reflexes also, like rooting, sucking. And so all that stuff could be really affecting, your speech, your breathing, and all the stuff that you guys are experts at. So hopefully that's clear and helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So your treatment, I mean, if I had a child that I thought there's something going on here, I really want to pursue like movement therapy, like what kind of time commitment is that?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If there's something serious going on, like a serious developmental delay, like my child is 2 years and still not walking and, stuff like that, those kids need a lot of these movements. So you're looking at you're going to intersperse it throughout your day as much as you can. And that would maybe look like as much as you can, like 45 minutes to an hour a day with, a young child. And actually the kids love it. Mm-hmm. They love these movements. Most of the kids love them. So then if I just want to say, if the kids don't like them, we have ways that we just do little tiny bits and we build from there so that it's easy for them to adapt and gradually really enjoy the movements and they're able to take the movements in and work with them. So we have ways of working with everyone. But then for like the typical school age kid, the maybe kindergarten to second grade or third grade, I mean, we've seen fantastic results in like 15 minutes a day. Wow. So you're consistent and the movements are extremely powerful. So, 15 to maybe sometimes it's not you. Sometimes you start with less. Sometimes you start with just like 3 to 5 minutes and then you do maybe 15 minutes a day. It depends on the child's situation. Mm-hmm. Ideally, so for example, if you take a child to like OT, which is maybe an hour a week, or if you're lucky, 2 hours a week, then, they might work with your child for, half hour at a time or an hour at a time and get a bunch of this stuff in, as long as they're trained in this. Some OTs are not trained in it. And then you would go home with a home movement program. And that home movement program could be anywhere from like 5 minutes to 20 minutes, usually. Mm-hmm. And then for those kids, you really want to make it fun and playful. And one thing you can do right away is get on the floor with your child and be on both of you on your bellies, kind of across from the room, and roll a ball back to one another, because then you're getting belly time in a way that's fun and engaging. Mm-hmm. And so that's just one little take home that you can do, but there are many, many of these movement patterns, and they do need to be addressed. I don't know of any other way, like, because some people go, well, if my child plays sports, is that good enough? Or my child's moving all the time anyway because he's hyperactive. But these are targeted patterns in the nervous system. And if they don't get the proper stimulation and expression in infancy, you really do have to kind of coax them out, get the patterns in there, and then the brain goes, oh, okay, I don't need that anymore because I've used it enough. And then it can be dormant the way it should be. At least this is in terms of the primitive reflexes. We're always meant to be moving rhythmically. So those stay with us our whole life, but the primitive reflexes should be dormant, like the startle one we talked about, or even this one. This one should be dormant because we want to be able to get to more. When I say this one, for people listening who don't have the visual, I'm doing that grasp reflex. But that's like a whole fist movement where all the fingers work at the same time and grasp. But you want to be able to go beyond that and get to more finessed movement, more nuanced movement. This is the basis of counting. And you want to be able to move each finger independently. So we're meant to use these movements and then move on to more complicated voluntary movements.
Mm-hmm.
So it can vary. I mean, if you have someone with cerebral palsy, they might need 30 to 45 minutes a day up to someone has a stroke or Parkinson's disease, that kind of thing. That's an interesting case. And we see with Parkinson's that's a disease in the brain where then the primitive reflexes start coming back. Mm-hmm. Even if they were dormant, they can come back later on. And so, yeah, but the thing is even if you're left with these unfinished movements, then even if you're walking a lot, you could be walking with those compensatory patterns with different, you're not aligned, balanced, and free of tension. And so you could be doing a rhythmic movement like walking, but it's not helping you as much as it could if you get rid of these underlying compensations and tension patterns. So hopefully that makes sense.
Fascinating. And our parents, how many sessions are what do you typically see? How do we know if this is working for a child or an individual? Is it a month? Is it a year? What kind of on average, what do people find?
Okay. So I like to start people out with a year commitment of, do your home movement program for a year. And we do have online training. So you can get really good training in this with videos and complete workbooks with photos. And so you can do it. You just take a little bit at a time and you keep going. And the thing is if you think about how much a baby moves and changes or is supposed to move and change in infancy, you have the 9 months in the womb and you have the whole year where a baby basically goes from being helpless to then be able to do all the different movements, rolling from front to back and back to front and sitting and crawling and walking and all that. That all takes time. So, I'd say commit to doing this. But the thing is it can be really joyful for the whole family to do it because parents need it too. Parents have had a lot of stress and oftentimes trauma. And especially if your child is intense or has high needs, it's a way of nurturing everyone. And so if you can think of it like, hey, we brush our teeth every night, we're going to do our movements every night. It can just be really fun and joyful. And it helps relieve stress for the parents. It helps everyone sleep better. So it's just a really good set of tools for lifelong health and well-being. It also is super regulating and helpful for emotions and for emotional upset. That's how I got into it with my daughters because we had a lot of emotional upset. And it was just this one pose that we learned. And we sat in that pose for like 30 seconds to a minute, and they were like, okay, they ran off and played. And I was like, this is magic. I was
It's
like,
your party trick.
Yeah. So we have movements and poses for emotional regulation that really work quickly.
That's amazing.
That's exciting.
That's amazing. So Sonia, you teach professionals how to incorporate your movement therapy into their therapy, like if you're working with OT or physical therapy or whatever, myofunctional therapy. Do you offer any training? Like, I'm just thinking about parents listening to this, like if they wanted to do more of an independent type of training, do you have videos online, or do you have a program that parents can kind of go through with their kids? Like, what kind of resources do you have?
Yeah, so the program, I wrote a curriculum, and there's 2 courses in the curriculum, and it's Brain and Sensory Foundations. And actually, it's the same curriculum that professionals take. So parents and professionals take the same curriculum. It's not, some of the movements have long, kind of complicated names like asymmetrical tonic neck reflex, but it's not rocket science. It's just natural movement. And once you actually do the patterns in your body, you just learn them like you learn anything. And so I tell parents, don't be intimidated by the names of the movements. They're just names. Like if you had a friend with a long, complicated name, you would just learn that name and it would not be a big deal. And so it's not beyond parents. It's just a matter of taking some time, and it can be super enjoyable movement exploration and the name. Yeah, there's a handful. There's like 11 in the first level and about 11 in the second level of the primitive reflexes with long names, but you just get used to them. And I say, like, treat them as your friends, because they actually are your friends. They will help you function better, and they're good to have for life. Like if somebody in your family gets an injury, or if someone has to have a surgery, those are traumatic things that could potentially bring these reflexes back. Even if they were dormant, they can come back. And that's actually what happens with PTSD. When there's a traumatic incident, your nervous system goes back into its survival mode, which is kind of at the same level where you were when you were an infant. So they're just a great set of tools for all the family, baby to elder, and for life.
That's awesome. So what's the time commitment? I mean, like if I wanted to go through your training program and start doing that at home with my kids, like is it a couple hours? Is it a multiple day thing? Like what? And then is there cost associated with it? Like how does someone get more involved?
Yeah, so there is a cost. We've got a lot of details online with FAQs and things like that, but just a quick sketch is that the main learning part is all online and it's on demand. So you can really take it at your own pace. When professionals take the course, it counts as 18 like contact hours or 18 CEUs. That's the first level. The second level is 13. So you can just pace yourself and go. You have, depending on when you enroll, you have a minimum of 9 months to do it. And then we also have we get together live online to answer any questions. I'm there giving really specific, detailed questions about application of it. And so students really like that because they can ask really specific questions and then get in-depth answers. But a lot of students, and that's optional, that part is optional, so it's not part of the 18 hours, but a lot of people like it. But some people don't use it. They find that they don't need to. So I don't know, for a parent doing this, if they did there's 8 sessions in the first level, there's 9 in the second. So if you did a session, I mean, it depends. You could do one session every 2 weeks or every month, and then just slowly work your way through it.
But your training program for professionals is the same program that you would put a parent through. So I guess if you're a parent, if you're a parent that, maybe your child needs more, or you really want to get involved and you're listening to this and you're like, whoa, that I need to know more about that, then that would probably be good. But I'm assuming you also may have like a directory or something of people that you've trained so that parents can find, the OTs or the PTs or the myofunctional therapists that have gone through the program. Is that safe to say?
Some of it is. So the difference between a professional and a parent taking this is that for a parent, we have assignments, like we have written assignments and exams. So you have to do that as a professional if you want certificate of completion. We've trained, I think, over 6,000 various parents, professionals, educators, but I don't have a directory. And the reason is because I could not really grapple how to do that with everything else I was doing with this curriculum and supporting students. So I made a choice to just teach the curriculum and then support students, because I just was not able to also then create a certification program, which if I did that would have to be way more in depth. And, about the time that I was sort of considering it, I just knew that I didn't have, so anyway, I don't have a database, but what you can do is if you find an OT that you really like, you can encourage them to take the course with you if you feel like you need it. But the other thing is I didn't want parents just automatically going to an OT or PT. I really wanted parents to learn it themselves. And the reason is because it's really important that they do the movements too, not just their kid, because everybody in a family dynamic, we all ping off one another. We all affect one another. And like for me, I didn't realize that I had my own Moro startle, and there's another one called fear paralysis. I had those in my system that were unfinished from my infancy and childhood. And because of that, my nervous system wasn't settled. So then how are my kids going to ever be settled if their mother, who they're relying on for their survival,
who carried them, right?
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So we all had to do this together.
Yeah.
And so that's number one. But the other thing is, it's way better for a parent to learn this, not only for their self-regulation, but also to be able to help your kids throughout their lifespan. And, a lot of parents can't even get to an OT session. I mean, there's one parent just wrote to me and said there's a year-long waiting list.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But another thing is the most ideal way to do this is with someone who loves the child and is willing to be playful with them and can do it in small pieces on a more regular basis. Like little bits every day is way better than once a week for 60 minutes. So those are the reasons why I really encourage parents to take the training. It is well worth your time to invest. And then if you need extra help, I help you. That's part of,
That's great. I love that you're like empowering parents to just like take ownership, because there's these, such barriers to healthcare these days. I mean, it takes months to get appointments, and, there's no follow-up, and you feel kind of like you're just like floating, in space. And, you just have to be your own advocate. And so I love that you're letting the parents own it and take charge. And you're not like, no, I'm only teaching professionals. You have to go see them, right? Because a lot of people, they're not going to be able to do that. Or maybe there's not somebody in their area that is doing this. I know, like, we are so excited at Green City Dental because we do work with a lot of kids that have breathing issues. We work with kids that have, tongue dysfunction issues where their tongue is low, and we're seeing a lot more tongue ties, right? Which is kind of like this thing we're all becoming very aware of, and we're learning that, well, there could be an actual tie, but it could also maybe be a fascial restriction. It could be the low tongue posture because of a reflex issue, right, that you're talking about. And so the work that you do is really exciting for us because we're excited to learn it and then be able to offer that to our patients. And If you are listening to this, Lily's been pretty quiet on this podcast, but Lily in our practice, she's come in and she's really incorporating all of these different modalities with myofunctional therapy, cranial sacral therapy. We're doing oralays now, which is really getting down and releasing those fascial restrictions and really also affecting the neurology behind the tongue function and stimulating cranial nerves. But also excited to add in some of this reflex stuff too, because it just is such a good complement to what we're doing.
Yeah, I met Sonia years ago when I, as a parent, was working with my son in his emotional regulation. And to be honest, it was really amazing. And I've taken the rhythmic movement trainings with Sonia 1, 2, and 3 and her online classes. And I brought my son to Sonia, and it's actually part of when I first learned about tongue tie. I went to one of her workshops, and there was a midwife and a chiropractor and an OT and a PT and a lactation consultant, and they're all like tongue tie. And it was like this really big aha moment of intersectionality. And so I've known Sonia a long time, and I have incorporated some of the movements when I work with kids who have sensory issues, especially. And so I'm excited to dive a little deeper into it. And I really feel like helping parents find their way in with this. As a parent, I actually had a hard time doing the movements with my son because it sort of triggers in the beginning. There was a response, and there was an immediate response, and there was a resistance to mother as teacher and director.
Yeah. Which I can see that. Yeah.
It was an interesting thing. So I recognize the need for the family to be going through the process together, as well as being well supported by other people.
And honestly, I mean, sometimes I get this all the time in the dental chair. People are like, tell my kid that they need to brush their teeth more. Scare them for me. So you be the bad guy, not me. And I'm like, okay, I'll totally do that for you, But yeah, when it comes to your own kids, being that parent and that teacher is tough sometimes. So that's why I think it's exciting that we're starting to implement some of this stuff, because when they come in, we're checking, hey, did you do your homework? Did you do your exercises? And the parents can kind of be support and not so not feel like there's that battle that's happening at home as much. So,
yeah. And one of the ways that we work with that dynamic is just getting as many members of the family possible doing the movements, and also making it fun, and putting some play in there. So we have a lot of different play-based things that we do that are fun and engaging with kids. And so that can be really helpful.
I agree. I think play is really important. It really helps our brain. They say that when you do something with play, you learn it so much faster than when you do it with repetition, that the brain takes in that information in a startlingly quick way versus, repetition, which is wonderful too. But I really appreciate that, your website, moveplaythrive.com, is it embodies that ethos. How do we bring more joy into our lives? How do we feel better?
Yeah, for sure. That's beautiful, Lily. Thank you.
So, Sonia, if patients are listening to this, if practitioners are listening to this, if you think that you want to learn more and go down this next rabbit hole, then Sonia, what is the best way for patients or people to get the information and find you?
Yeah, so we just updated our website. I'm so excited. It is beautiful, but it's also really useful because we have a case study index. So a lot of our case studies are published. We have so many more that we're going to be publishing, so check back. But we have an index now. So if you're interested in seeing how does this work for ADHD, how does it work for hyperactivity or sensory processing, you can go up there and look. And then we have conditions pages that are also indexed, which gives you a little background about why it's working and So it's more like I bring in some of the research because it is fascinating that there's quite a bit of research to talk about of like how these incomplete infant movements, or in most cases with research, it's primitive reflexes. But there's also, I should just mention this, there's a new study that came out in 2023 that showed that 5 minutes, 4 times a week of rhythmic movements only, these are innate rhythmic movements, raised the reading scores for school age kids. And so that's pretty amazing in 5 minutes. So that gives you.
I feel a whole other podcast coming on here.
Oh.
Just to say, like, literally, I'm like, you're like, we have all these case studies and ADHD and this and that and these studies. And I'm like, we need to dive deeper into those. I would love to do another podcast with you, Sonia, and talk more about those specifics. It just sounds awesome.
Yeah. And the website is moveplaythrive.com. And then the courses are right up there. You can get information about those there. The courses are called Brain and Sensory Foundations. And there's a first level and a second level. But thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Sonia. Thank you, Lily. You know, Lily's been telling me forever, like, reflexes, and all the classes, like I said, I go to, they're like reflexes, but they don't really talk much about it. So this has been so insightful just as a practitioner and as a mom. I'm like looking at my daughter with different lens now going, we need to check you out, girl. She's definitely been a needy one since very, very early on. She's a mommy's girl, and wouldn't be surprising to me if she could benefit from this therapy. So I want to thank you, Sonia, for being on. Lily, thank you so much. And make sure that you like our podcast, Your Mouth Matters, and find us on social media, Green City Dental and O2Dontics. And until next time, remember, your mouth matters.
Thank you.